Cool.
Here we are. So we're back. So,
Yeah, we'll call this part two, I guess, like for the sake of continuity, we should do like a brief intro.
yep.
But yeah, basically this is part two of our ever growing podcast with ever growing band of viewers. Um, yeah, we basically have talked about a wide variety of podcasts, and in part one we talked about um, your podcast of choice for the week, which was the Bible for Normal People, correct?
Yep.
Yeah, and yeah, very interesting podcast for people to check out. And the second part of our open season, or the home opener, I guess you could call it. I'll go into
The
the one I chose, and
home opener and a double header. That's a pretty good deal.
yeah, exactly. Um, but yeah, like just briefly going over what we got, what we got into is we're two brothers that are launching a podcast of wide political views, spread throughout all of our brothers. We're five of us. We've often joked that uh, in any election in a riding, we could probably all run for the five different main parties in Canada,
Absolutely.
none of us would have a problem aligning with a different party. But
That's true. That's true.
part of
There's
what
more than five parties, though. More than five parties,
No, I
according to
know.
rumor.
Oh, for sure. And
The
there's
five
always,
main ones.
yeah, there's definitely
I
more.
would be the first Bloc Québécois candidate to have a riding in outside of Quebec.
Yeah, who knows, man? You think they would try? 'Cause, it's funny, like you don't know.
It would start a war, though. Just look at
But
Ukraine.
there's quite a bit of like Franco-Ontarien that like
Oh,
in
absolutely.
Ottawa that obviously like share many similar values. Like I do think that it's not outrageous to think that, although it seems like it would never be the case.
So that's really interesting. Like, let's get on the train. Like, absolutely, we'll get on the train of you talking about your podcast, but let's get more on the train of me asking you questions.
Yeah, go for it.
Do you know that because you still have some of your friends from our French elementary school on Facebook, and you see how they kind of express similar views? Is that a thing at all, or like what's your relation to the Franco-Ontarians right now?
Yeah, well, I'll say first of all that not really. There's a few people like from our years in the French system that I still like come across on social media, and like
Yeah.
most surprisingly, like somebody, yeah, that I went to school with, maybe like uh well, high school, what's that, 6 years including middle school, so a good like 10 years ago at least.
Yeah.
We knew each other in elementary school, but now we've reconnected through business. Like I've done jobs for him
Oh,
and
yeah.
stuff, and it's like, wow, like super cool. Like you would never imagine. But in terms of actually keeping contact with them, no. But like I said, yeah, I've run into a few people through business, through like various jobs before I got into my businesses. Like you just kind of run into people. Like Ottawa, although it's a city, it's one of the smaller ones in Canada, comparatively to the big metro, Toronto, Vancouver kind of things.
Absolutely.
But in Montreal, I guess too. But so small world. Definitely still see some of them here and there. I will say that I have like my previous job before I left, and even in running the business, like it is surprising just how much business is generated by like French only speaking people. So like people that
And you
reach out to
converse with
me.
them in French?
Yeah, exactly. So people that reach out to
Wow.
me, there's no way we would figure out what they want unless we speak in French, because they're not gonna, like, I mean, they'll politely try, but they'll definitely, like,
Yeah.
we'll get through the conversation if we switch to French, and
Yeah.
it turns into orders, turns into money, and it's something that, like, it really surprised me how there's like people, like, if you don't speak French, like they'll call other places in Ottawa that do,
Yeah.
and they'll happily or not knowingly pay more or
Okay,
pay
okay,
whatever or get whatever
okay,
service from
okay,
someone that only
okay,
speaks
okay,
French. So
okay, okay. So that's what you see as similar to
yeah,
Bob
I do see that,
Quadri's.
and
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
and
for sure.
there is a certain sense of like pride that you see
Oh yeah,
French people that are very well. It's very much a thing, especially in Quebec. It's like protect the culture, protect the language, and you see that in the way they like they don't learn English, and in a if you you go to some places in Ottawa, like good luck finding someone that speaks French. But at the same time, there are little pockets here and there, and you're like, wow, these people cannot speak English. You're like, wow, it's shocking. But they work, they have money, and they're part of society. Like it's a pretty crazy environment that not many people experience. On top of
absolutely.
like a million other countries in the downtown core, like of Ottawa.
Sure, sure,
Definitely,
sure, sure, sure.
yeah. Um,
Fascinating. Wow, that's a really cool perspective on that issue that I feel like we don't often hear, right? Like the ironic thing is like for sure we hear a bit more about small business owners because there's the, as they call it in Quebec, the pénurie de main d'oeuvre, so like the labor shortage or whatever that's kind of going on in every sector. Uh,
the world.
yeah, yeah, indeed. Um, and so but so there was a bit more kind of attention to small business owners on the news and stuff like that, but I feel like in terms of talking about these issues, other than kind of in the election when you get like a classic CBC panel of like 5 Canadians from different walks of life, you don't often hear, we have this idea that there's expert perspectives. This is where I want to go with this question, and then we get into the podcast, because that's what podcasts are, right? They're various, like with good guests, various expert perspectives, right?
Yeah, for sure, for
but
sure.
but I come from the Rimini Protocol School of Theater and communications more generally, or art making more generally, or content creation more generally, if you want to lean on that term that I absolutely hate. Um, um, but where they say, everyone's an expert in a particular way, right? So your interpretation, your experience from dealing with these people on a business level, gives you a very different take than, say, the political scientist who's studying these relations from like a step back and analyzing whatever, you know what I mean? So it's really interesting. And so before we get into your podcast, like I just thought I'd ask you about who are some experts that you look to more generally outside of the world of podcasts, if you do, like in terms of books, in terms of whatever.
Yeah.
Because I know
Well,
you like you said before, you read a lot of books, so it might be hard to pinpoint like just one or two that are like stellar. But
yeah. Well, I mean, in terms of experts, like definitely a mentor, and I mean, he's more of well, mentor, I guess, would be someone that's involved about life, but somebody I look up to for sure. I do think, I guess, one of my criticisms is that he often talks in metaphors and
okay,
what ifs and like very like vague concepts,
yeah,
which I do appreciate, but I do find it's less useful. But where was I going with? So the expert, and I mean, I'm sure I think I've heard some of your own opinions on the guy, but Robert Kiyosaki.
okay, sure, yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah,
so yeah, author of Rich Dad Poor Dad definitely speaks out to me. He does run what he calls it Rich Dad Radio Show, which I believe is
okay,
a podcast forum. I've seen a few bits and stuff, but not really.
yeah,
Like it's cool. Like this is somebody that obviously is in the game of podcasting, but I've consumed books like
yeah, yeah,
really
yeah,
just his
right,
books,
right,
and
right, right, right,
I've seen some videos of him, but he's an old guy. Like he's
yeah, yeah,
most of
yeah,
his content was coming in the 90s,
for
and
sure, for
like
sure,
that's where he really started to make a name for himself. So
yeah,
I mean, it's interesting. Like I'm very, very immersed into the Robert Kiyosaki of the 1990s till say like 2008
Hey,
or maybe 2012. Like all those books up to then, like have been really dope. And to be quite honest, I haven't followed too much of his more recent work or, like I said, his podcast. So
sure. I
really,
mean, I'm all about looking to histories, and we were born in the 90s, so we have a particular experience of the 90s, and I think looking back to like what were some of the big uh you know for lack of a better term, who were the influencers of the 90s. And it's undoubtedly, I mean, how many books did he sell in the 90s?
I don't
Like
know how many,
probably,
but
no, but probably millions,
he
right?
was
Like he
definitely
was
like he
really
was
good at selling books, right?
oh, for sure. And like he was like on top of the New York bestseller for quite a
For
while there.
sure, for sure, for sure.
And yeah, I mean, he's made his fair share of claims, and some of them are definitely out there, and he'll pick up critics left, right, and center. But no, he definitely speaks a good amount of I guess practical mindset is more of what he preaches rather than like
Oh, fascinating.
actual
Yeah,
actionable stuff. But if you really take a minute to think about what he says, and most of it is actionable, but you do have to apply yourself. Like,
well,
um,
that would be the definition of actionable, I'd say.
yeah, yeah, no,
That
but
you have to apply yourself.
no, but I mean, some of it's just like do this and this will happen. But the
Right.
other mindset is like think like this and you'll start doing this. Those are
Yeah,
the two
yes, I
comparisons, I
so
think.
I yeah, absolutely, that's deep. I mean, I'm really into that kind of again, as folks will come to know us more, I think, yeah, I think, metacognition, it's a super important thing. It's a thinking about how you're thinking, you know
Yeah,
that's crucial, because it does it like Robert Wright, he wrote a book called Why Buddhism Is True. And he's really just talking about from the neuroscientific perspective. He might not be writing from the I know Buddhism from a different place than Robert Wright, but I've heard a few of his arguments and they seem right. Sam Harris, I think, probably gets it into it better, but you just talk about the habits of mind.
yeah,
Like if you're always worrying, then you're going to make shitty work. If you're always overconfident, then you might like burn a lot of bridges. You know what I mean? But if you are thinking about, okay, like I've got this thing, how can I grow it? um who am I accountable to? Who do I not fuck up with? I think all of that stuff is super important.
yeah, yeah.
So let's get right to it. With that, I think that's really cool, unless there's another expert you want to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. There's quite a wide range, so I don't think like mentioning anybody over the other will do it justice. Like I think I'm
Sure.
really like not really focused on specific things right now. Like I'm really, really trying to become a jack of all trades kind of thing. And I mean, well, literally like in the trades and welding, but like I'm really trying to dive deep into the social media world, the podcast game, but
Yeah,
everything from but the Instagram reels and I gotta create a TikTok account, like all these things that people say you gotta go do. So still kind of navigating through that. And I'll say
sure.
that I'm interested in a lot of people like that. Interested in quite a bit of like, the weird guy big names, like, the Musks, like those are super
Sure.
cool topics. And like, but it's very like what's very intriguing to me is like you listen to him and he's like, that guy is fucking weird. Like
Oh, absolutely.
it's like it's these people that are incredibly intelligent and like that shape their whole life because they have so much to like output because it's all just in there, and it's very
Yeah, well, one of the things that doesn't get talked about enough about Elon Musk is, because he's so future oriented, we forget to talk about his past, right? But he's somebody who, from a super young age was not only kind of, trying out to make his own businesses and all of these things. That story gets told. but he also read a lot of books, right?
Yeah.
And I have this new philosophy. I think of somebody like Yuval Noah Harari, who wrote *Sapiens*, right? And that's like literally all of human history in one book, and then he did it for the future, and then he did it for the present, right? He does 60 days of silent meditation. So if you think of somebody like Elon Musk, anyways, the point that I want to say is, if you want to have something to say, you really have to listen.
Yeah.
Right. And that's profound. Like, if you want to make a speech, stop talking.
Yeah, for
You know
sure.
what I mean? So I'll take my own advice and stop
Yeah, no,
talking.
super interesting topic. It actually came up in my it came up like recently where kind of similar anyways. It's probably one of these guys, like you said, like one of the guys I look up to, but you start consuming all their content and you mix up who said what, but
Oh, that's a problem
who
too,
said
for
it. But
sure.
basically it was along the lines of um what's it, along the lines of, okay, so if you when you're young, when you're in your 20s, um or I mean, I guess what is young these days? We're almost 30. um
Indeed.
so you often will argue and disagree and have all these, like, you're ready to just shout down other people's opinions because you're 20 and you know
Yeah.
better
Yeah.
because you don't know better. Like, you're like, well, this is how it should be because that's how I think it should be. And it's like something that that really changes as you start to experience success and abundance, is like you very rarely get into arguments because you know what works and
Yep.
you know what doesn't work. So when
Yep.
someone comes preaching this and that and this, and it's more like, well, I've done this and my life is this, and I like,
Yeah.
one of us in this conversation is stressed and the other one, you know, has figured it out. And
Yeah.
um yeah, so it's something like that where I just find uh, I might be going into a loop here and coming off topic, but like it's really um, I'm really getting loopy here.
That's okay.
Yeah, all part of the game, I
I'll
guess.
cut that part out.
Yeah,
Save it
good,
for the
good, good.
blooper reel.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
loopy bloopers. We will have to come up with a good title, but no. Well, so let me help you, guide you back on top. Right, you're talking basically about how um, once you, like, I would argue it's like, once your life is in such a place where you can no longer tolerate, like, this is kind of like kind of Jordan Peterson style interpretation. When you're at a point in your life where you can no longer tolerate just like running your wheels in the mud, and you want to, like, actually, so let's do this by poking fun at you. When you
sounds fun.
there was no there was there was this time when you were a very young kid where I gave you my guitar, okay, and you were playing it, and you were plucking the strings up and down the neck, but you weren't pressing down notes on the neck, and you kept on saying, it's not changing sound, right?
Yeah.
There's a moment, there's a classic phrase, I forget also who said it at this hour of the night, but we'll put it in the show notes. I'll do the research. If you want to be a research assistant, please apply.
Yeah, I'll take an
We
interest.
make a lot of references.
Yeah, we also have a ever growing
Episode 2, and we're already hiring. Look
yeah.
at us practicing abundance. Uh, no, but um, like there's something along the lines of like you know being a true idiot is like doing this, like knowing what you're doing doesn't work but still doing it, right? And that's okay, like it happens. It honestly, everybody's an idiot sometimes, right? Like and you can also, clearly you can get to a point where you find out what works and then you just stick with it,
Yeah.
and then it stops working because the world changes.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I mean, I mean, more so than ever these days, like it's, you have an opinion and it's pretty cool and makes sense to most people one day. And then the other day it's like, whoa, we can't be thinking like that. And
No, that's a good, no, that's a good point. I mean, everybody talks about freedom, and then the convoy for freedom comes, and they're like, no, well, not that kind of freedom. And I'm like, weren't you talking about freedom?
yeah, yeah.
Weren't we talking about democracy?
Yeah.
And so there's a profound sickness in our democracy. I think that we agree with that statement, and that's why we're probably having this conversation.
Yeah, I do think there's a sense of mass confusion where everybody's like, democracy is good, and the other side saying is democracy is good. But both people are saying, I want my democracy. Like, you have to
Absolutely.
understand, like,
Yeah.
there's definitely like, especially in you know, in the types of governments that the Western world has, is like, you need a good 3-4 years to change the scope of what's actually happening. And I mean, and sometimes it never changes at all, or both parties are working to a same end, but they're all arguing the opposite
Indeed.
way, like,
Indeed.
yeah. So I mean, I think I think like it's very tragic. Like there is a lot of like two people arguing, and if you really said both their sentence backwards, it would be the same thing. But because they're saying it
Yep.
forwards, they're
Yeah.
arguing with each
Oh,
other.
yeah. I mean,
Like,
so I come from a theater tradition, right? And one of the things I always hated to talk about was subtext. I thought that was bullshit. I didn't really like this. I liked a lot of really exciting theater, and I thought when people were trying to do Hollywood films in theater school, I said, why don't you go make Hollywood films and leave the theater alone? But subtext is still really important, right? And I think what you're saying in a way is identifying that. Like I look at the Convoy for Freedom and I think people are just saying, hey, guess what? I'm a human too.
yeah, for sure. I mean, and I think, a lot of people were saying that all along in small little pockets.
Yeah.
The biggest problem is, it's, I mean, it's my problem and it's not everybody's problem, but as soon as like somebody's like, well, it is my problem too. And, there's a big, like, it's definitely a wave, like people that, this kind of sucks, but my life is going fine. There's money coming from this government, or it didn't affect me at all with my job. So like, what do I really have to complain about? Like,
Yeah.
and that's, there's a big thing in Canada. It's like there's so many people that like, what's changed for them other than for the better? Like this whole like fucking yeah, just change in government where there's all these like edicts and like, yeah, no,
Yeah.
don't do this, but we'll give you money, so it's okay. And
Yeah.
and it is okay. Like if you're giving me money, well, I'm not gonna fucking argue. You're giving me money, I'll just shut up and take it. But I think you push three too many people, and then the other six people that kind of got nudged, like they're like, hey, yeah, that wasn't too right. Like fuck this guy. And
Yeah. Hmm.
but I think it's a bit of a wave. Like I think there's some people that were slightly bothered but not affected, and
Sure.
that's what's really. I think that's what's driving this whole convoy to freedom. And let's segue into the book, because it's, or the book, the
The
podcast,
podcast. Yeah, please.
because it actually is pretty relevant. So I know we brought him up, and I'm sure he'll probably be a hot topic for years to come if we follow on this like podcast critique kind of episode format. But it is Jordan Peterson, episode
Okay.
78.
Okay. Is
And
that with who's the guest on that one?
it's Brian Peckford.
Okay.
Um, Not a name I've heard before, but really old guy. If you
Okay.
So
Okay.
basically, this guy, very interesting. I'll break down the podcast episode a bit, but
I want to hear, though, before we get to the podcast episode, you know, obviously a lot of people who will want to be listening to what we're doing, you know, they're probably going to be familiar with who Jordan Peterson is.
okay.
But I would still love to hear your take on what the Jordan Peterson podcast is,
Okay.
because I have my own take. You know, I know him as a psychologist. I started listening to his content for homework, basically,
Yeah.
in a psychology class. But I'd love to hear your take on why
Okay.
Jordan Peterson podcast is important and what's it really about.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I'll first say it's about everything.
Okay.
Um,
Sure.
he's very like one of those guys, like in that whole list of like people that A, influence me, or B, are like experts in the field. He'll very much assert his expertise in various arguments, and I think when there's arguments that he's not able to comment on, he'll be pretty clear with that.
Yeah.
But yeah, clinical psychologist, uh, a professor for a while, and now just social media phenomena around the world, and I think author, and really big impact on. And I mean, it's one of his critiques, but I also say it's probably one of his um, things that people get drawn to him, is that he's like a big positive influence on men in the world. Like
Oh,
he
undeniably.
it's definitely one of
Undeniably.
his like preaching points. Like he'll definitely
Yeah.
go to the
He
struggle.
knows who he is and he speaks to people like himself.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, and I mean, above anything else, like it's actually pretty cool that you would get like very famous worldwide person that, like, for example, American commenters or Australia or UK would comment on this guy, but no, we do have a bit of like piece of the pie. Like he's a Canadian, I think, born and raised in Alberta, and yeah, very cool. Like he has some like small town stories, and like very country living. Like I think his dad's like a gunsmith, or he has like a at least a large gun collection, and it's like very involved and stuff like that. It's just like a very cool story. But on
Sure.
top of all of that, like back to where I was coming from, like the list of mentors and people that I would consider expert, like also a strange guy, he's like a Musk, like a very hyper intellectual, but very strange. Like you hear
Oh
some.
yeah, he's not everybody knows, but Jordan Peterson, he only has 3 books, right? First of all, his first book, you have to buy it for like $100 because it's a thick academic textbook.
The Maps of Meanings.
Yeah. But he also has published like upwards of like I'm probably underselling this, but upwards of hundreds of academic articles in like really hard to get into journals of psychology. He
Yeah,
really is as productive as Elon Musk in his own right.
for sure, for sure. And
Undeniably.
like, not to mention that he basically just started handing out free seminars on his, like, that was his whole
Yeah,
YouTube platform before podcasting. Like it was
sure.
basically just seminars and class discussions and stuff. Very interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that's why I'm drawn to him. Like Canadian, very well spoken, very critical thinking, and well, as if you've read some of his books, like he stands up straight, and you know, and yeah, very kind of stand up guy. Will tell you like it is, and kind of won't back down when being pushed. Like he's very present in all sorts of interviews from every side of any political view, and will
Sure.
put himself in uncomfortable situations where people are ready to kind of go after him. And
Absolutely.
very interesting, especially because he is frail, to say the least. Like him and his family,
Sure.
lots of health conditions, and
For
and
sure.
and I'll actually get into it on this specific episode. Like you'll hear near the end of it, and I guess somebody on his team is like, well, can we touch on this topic before we shut it down? And he's like, I really don't have any more energy. And you're like, wow, like this guy's a fucking human. Like this guy just
Yeah.
yeah, that's what he does. So I'll get into the episode. So basically,
So
first part was
Brian,
cool.
say the name again. Brian Meckburn.
Brian Peckford.
Peckford. Okay.
Yeah, so he's a previous premier of Newfoundland.
Okay.
Interestingly, like old guy, like I was saying, like he was one of the well, he was premier at the time where they formed the Charter of Rights, I believe, if I understood the podcast
Okay,
correctly.
so the 70s, like 60s, 70s, or was that 82?
Yeah, I mean,
My Canadian history is very shoddy.
yeah, me too. And like when I think of it, it's like it's that like that seems very recent history for someone to be alive. So
Well,
I was like,
it was the other Trudeau. It was the other Trudeau was the prime minister at that time.
yes, exactly. And they go into this at this time, and actually like one of the talking points is that so the premiers of Canada, like the 10 provinces, had put forth this I don't know if it's a bill or whatnot, but basically the Constitution Act, and
Okay.
to put in a Charter of Rights, because it was, I guess, um, basically Canada before then was operating on British common law,
Right.
and there was nothing really written on paper. It was all case
Sure.
law.
Sure.
So
Okay.
that was the whole point of this. And anyways, they get into the podcast. It goes on, how kind of Trudeau at that time uh, was working with them. Like it was a big negotiation to get this whole thing in place. And then he opted out and was trying to do his own thing at the federal level.
Yeah.
And then it ends up going through a year later under everybody's umbrella. But I mean, if you look at the document, I think it's Trudeau on the name. So I don't know who got the last laugh on that. The guy, the guy that is pretty defensive about that on the podcast. But
Sure.
yeah. Anyways, this guy, why he's relevant. So he retired premier, basically doing. He moved out to Vancouver, so
Yep.
probably living the nice weather retired life. But he got back into the game. He just announced, and he used this podcast to announce like a big lawsuit against the Canadian government.
Whoa, fuck.
And it's an interesting topic. So basically, he's challenging a breach of the charter rights, but it's not that. Like the way he explains it is there's quite a wide range of things that have kind of been breached in the past 2 years of this stuff, and he is very acknowledgeable. Like at the beginning of the pandemic, like there were a lot of unknowns, and he
Sure.
does state, along with Peterson, that in there is a reasonable justification for about the first 90 days of everything with all the unknowns, that
Sure.
any of the measures put in place were reasonable based off the information at hand. It's just where it got unreasonable is as more information came out and things became out of hand, and just like basically
Yeah.
ruling by edict, and no concern for in no concern for where the charter rights kind of explain how you're allowed to treat these situations.
Okay.
So that's where he's coming from, and he picks a specific breach, which is freedom of travel, I believe.
Okay.
So basically, now in Canada, you can't go anywhere like plane or train, or you can't fly basically, or go out on these federally funded transportation systems, basically,
Okay.
without a
Unless you're
vaccine.
double. Okay. Got you. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
its argument to this is, well, first of all, it's a fundamental freedom, and
Oh yeah,
one of the
and
reasons.
things like via rail, like they operate at a loss, right? That the
Oh, for sure, it's
Yeah,
government, like it's tax paid, basically, like
absolutely.
yeah, because it's not.
Hella important to have, but they operate at a loss. So I see where you're going with this. Please continue. This is fascinating.
Yeah. So basically, he in the formation of it was it, and it's very interesting. And he said why he's in a uh, special position to sue is that one of the things that's taken into consideration in these types of lawsuits is the intention of which these bills were put in place. It goes into more detail of when
Sure.
it is, but like something that the people ruling on this will discuss is that well, when they write this in the charter, what was the intention?
Mhm.
And like who better to speak on the intention than somebody that was one of the writers of it, like. So it's a pretty interesting, like how he's the guy that and he does mention like in the past, his career, like he was present in politics and like people knew his name, but just not so much now.
Yeah.
But yeah, just interesting, relevant podcast. Like he gets into a lot of what's going on right now in Canada. I think there's a big wave of change,
Mm.
and I think it's more so this guy is aiming for more of a statement. I think like you'll see if you do listen to a podcast like this, you see he's very hesitant,
Yeah.
and like I said, like they picked this one breach of the charter rights as opposed to like he does infer that all these things are breached, but if you're going to do a lawsuit, like you do have to be precise and you have to pick something you could win.
For sure, for sure.
Yeah, so it's just interesting to see that whole point of view, but Peterson like does get into like, well, like what's your ultimate goal? Like, so say you're absolutely right and the courts rule that like this is completely wrong, like what do you think should happen to the politicians? And like the guy's very tentative of like he doesn't
Yeah.
even like, it's like, well, technically if there's someone breaking the law, somebody should be fined or jailed or something, but it's not like, basically he's like, well, there should be people that would be immediately like booted out of the party and like there should be all this huge restructuring, but it's like who's really getting the consequences there? Like you get fired, or I mean, if you're breaking the law, you're breaking the law. That's interesting. Like I think a lot of people, I mean, for the past 2 years, especially in Canada, people are walking on eggshells and not sure who can say
Oh,
what.
100%,
And
100%.
right now, there's like it's a very specific
I
moment.
mean, I think we're walking on shards of glass, not eggshells. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah,
Like with Crocs.
yeah, exactly,
That could
exactly.
unpack. That could be a whole episode.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. I know exactly
Yeah,
what you're
so
talking about.
without just like saying the whole podcast word for word, just very interesting. They go into to very
So,
like,
so what I'm most curious about, so like, yeah, absolutely, with how you framed it is, again, because I only know Jordan Peterson really as a psychologist. I've listened to a few of his podcasts. The episode with Scott Barry Kaufman, I think I texted you that you should listen to that. He talks basically like I would love to use what he says about podcasts as a soundbite for this podcast,
yeah,
because he talks about how a podcast is like a very interesting form of long form media where you can if you're qualified to do so, which he certainly is, effectively have a graduate level university seminar, discuss thoughts, and there's no telling how big of an impact any one episode can have, because each podcast episode can have its own bibliography. It could be its own course in a way.
yeah,
But so I'm really interested, how did Jordan Peterson ask questions of this politician?
yeah.
Did he
So
talk about him as an individual? Did he talk about just the project, or was it more, take
yes,
me in
I'll
down
say
that road?
both. Like he does dig into like why this why he's in the position to sue, like why would you make these decisions? Because like this guy lives a comfortable life, but I will say like he's a retired politician. You know what I mean? Like the
Yeah,
guy has no reason to be suing the government unless it's a reason of personal belief, which it seems to be. So he digs into that, which is interesting, but more so is like he very much is, it's almost like newscasting. Like he'll be like, so this is what you're doing, correct? Like so
mm,
basically he'll explain what his guest's point of view is, and he'll be like, and that's what you're doing, correct? And like, so just so we can get this in like broader terms so people understand, like he's
yeah,
very much taking this opinion that is not, like this guy doesn't have the reach that Peterson has.
sure.
And he will ad lib, like he'll say like, so this clearly tyrannical choice or like this clearly unconstitutional decision
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
is
yeah,
this
yeah,
like,
yeah.
and then
The
and agree with
classic public intellectual. Frank Chomsky talks the exact same way.
it. Yeah,
Absolutely.
so as far as I can tell, like he's he's picking and choosing his guests in a way that make impact. And
Yeah.
like, I mean, in the same realm of politicians, and I know he delves way outside of like everything, and he does go with like, if you're really looking for kind of topics, like he's a good guy to just sift through different things he's gone into. And it's, yeah, all sorts of psychology and different experts of all walks of life all around the world. Very interesting.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But in terms of the politician, and like, I guess very relevant to now, like in Canada for sure, is like he also did an interview with Maxime Bernier just before the
Right.
election.
That's honestly the episode I thought you were gonna bring up. So
Yeah, I mean, I did watch that, and to be honest, it wasn't like the be all end all of his episodes. And
yeah.
that's probably more of a critique to Bernier. Like he has a lot of work to do to develop the recognition that he once held as like a high ranking conservative PM or
Right.
member
Oh, for
MPs.
sure, for sure.
Um, but it's just interesting. Like I think he's picking his guests and in a timing that is relevant. And I don't think he's not saying like, well, I 100% agree with you and all my viewers should too. Like
Yeah,
he very much makes a point
yeah,
to put the logic behind their answers and make
yeah,
sure his viewers understand the logic. So
yeah.
yeah, that's why very interesting. But above all, like I do have a fascination with history, and it was very cool to, it's a relatively old guy interviewing a very old guy that yeah, that has all this insight of like he was there when this shit was being written. And like it's very
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Very, very cool stuff. And it's something like even talking to our grandpa, like I drove him home a few months ago, and he's telling me his political opinions. It's like, wow, like if you really take the time to listen to old people, like there's just wisdom that's not said on a regular basis, that they like, well, this
True.
is what I've done, and I don't do this anymore because of this. And it's like very simple terms, but it's like, oh, this guy lived his life, and he has some answers to some questions that some
Yeah,
people might be unsure. But
yeah.
there's a surety in age and wisdom for sure.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no. So I think it would be appropriate to take a giant left step that's gonna shock you. Um, but it's 100% related, I promise. Um, so Jordan Peterson, psychologist,
Yeah,
okay, psychology, mental health, okay. You know that I struggle sometimes with my mental health, go off the rails, we could say. So
yeah,
actually, the last 2 weeks were a moment. Bell Let's Stock Day was yesterday. Bell Let's Stock Day is like a profoundly triggering thing for me. It always gets me to be extra anti-capitalist and all of these things. Yeah, it always and it's always early in January, and because a lot, it's just well documented that a lot of mental health problems develop in January because like of failed New Year's resolutions and the catastrophes, so on and so forth. Well, I actually had one of those silly episodes in the last 2 weeks, and for the first time, it was actually one of those like manic episodes that was just hyper positive, and I was super confident, right, riding on all of this abundance stuff and stuff. So I'm going to share my screen right now, and we're just gonna see your reaction, okay,
okay.
to my screen. Let me yeah, so we'll just go. So I'm going to start just oh, why is there an echo? I'm going to stop the share. And what is there an echo just permanently now?
I don't have the echo on my end, so might just be your audio.
Uh-oh. Anyways, okay, let me try that again. And um so yeah, so as part of that episode, I made like a huge project on this writer who could be considered the anti-Jordan Peterson. Her name is Bell Hooks.
Okay.
And she's the one who's famous for being against and naming the term, the multi-word term, imperialist, white supremacist, sexist, I add ageist, ableist, heteropatriarchy. Okay, so she's misunderstood. She's misunderstood as one of the woke crowd in the so-called white fragility.
I can't imagine why with
right. No, I know.
so many
I know.
syllables.
No, but it is really misunderstood because
Sure.
she's
But
a
I'm
lot.
telling you, like that, just that
I know.
phrase
We
or
agree.
word.
We agree. Anyway, so I made a huge project about her. She died unfortunately in December,
Okay.
and anyways, I'm just so here I am sharing my screen, going to my email. Okay, we can cut this out if you think that it won't be good, but so I'm just gonna go to my Ottawa email. I think you know where this is
I've
going.
always been impartial to, like, why don't people just call it Ottawa U?
Ottawa versus Ottawa.
And as far as I've heard, is every person that's old that went to Ottawa U calls it Ottawa U.
Yeah. So here I am going to my sent items. Okay.
Okay.
And let's go down like a while. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So we're coming up. Okay, this is me talking to my professors. Okay, and then it's basically here. Okay, you see Slavoj Žižek. I don't know if you know, but there's a debate between Jordan Peterson and Slavoj Žižek. Have you heard about that debate?
No.
You should definitely watch it. It's very interesting.
Okay.
I'm definitely on Team Slavoj. And then I wrote to this German theater director that I was a student of. And then check this out. I wrote a business letter to Jordan Peterson. See, to business@jordanbpeterson.com. It's a real thing. Okay. And anyways, we don't have to read the actual thing that I wrote, but just while we're talking about his podcast, okay, I suggested he should have the Bible for normal people.
Okay.
On his podcast as number 3. Cal Newport, who I also mentioned last episode. I wrote, as you must know, Cal Newport is a brilliant thinker. I think they might even share a publisher at Penguin. But when it comes to productivity, he's recently starting to write about the deep life. He holds you in very high reverence. And his Deep Questions podcast is follower of incredible intellect and curiosity. So I think it'd be a great guest on the Jordan Peterson podcast. But then I thought the fight of the century would be with Cornel West, who's the guy on the tightrope that I was talking about. I won't read this giant paragraph. The audience will be able to see the screen and pause the video if they want to. But anyway, so I just wanted to share that. So I really think, Jordan Peterson needs to go one step further with his guests and really choose guests that, that are really on the different side. But he and Cornel West would really agree on so many things because they're both Christian.
Yeah, what I would say, Pete, is that actually, like the Jordan Peterson, I feel I'm just guessing here, is there's a lot of guests that oppose him that would very much not go as a guest on his podcast.
Right.
But if you look at a lot of older content of Jordan Peterson, he shows up on a lot of panels or like interviews with news, like with news anchors around the world. So sometimes it's in Canada, like there was a few panels in Canada, but it's older content, and then a few in the UK and Australia, and very, very interesting stuff because he'll be on a panel with like 4 people against him, and
it's like so the other question I want to ask before you say more about Jordan Peterson is I really like that you chose Jordan Peterson. I'm curious how you contrast, okay, Jordan Peterson and Joe Rogan, because Joe Rogan, I think he's very casual. But also when you just talk about a panel of Jordan Peterson kind of against four people who are against him, I just I can't help but think of like, the Big Show in WWE, just like fighting off Rey Mysterio and Eddie Guerrero and everybody else.
Yeah,
Like, or the Great Khali, like it's Jordan Peterson, the Great Khali of podcasts.
yeah. Well, I don't know. Whoever the best wrestler is, Joe Rogan's definitely the top one right now for sure.
For sure.
He's definitely turning the most heads. The contrast, I mean, it's difficult. Like Joe Rogan is definitely more of a left-leaning soul, but he,
Yes, he supported Bernie Sanders, but not Joe Biden, which I also agree. I don't support Joe Biden,
yeah,
but I
but he's
supported Bernie
also
Sanders.
he's definitely more of a libertarian,
Yeah, exactly.
like
Exactly.
America's America, where people are free and don't sign new papers.
Yeah.
Um, which yeah, I mean, I think it's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if I give an honest comparison, Joe Rogan will he'll get people, everybody, because everybody would be out of their
Yeah,
mind.
Cornel West was on Joe Rogan, but he wasn't on
Yeah,
Jordan Peterson.
basically
Yeah.
most people would be out of their mind to say no. Like
Right.
I think the few people that haven't, that he's like publicly said like I tried, but there was no way it was gonna happen, was Biden and Trump. Like he was open to doing um like presidential interview podcasts. But I think it was just like he asked real questions, so it wouldn't benefit either of them.
Right.
Um, as as politics goes. But so, but I think the contrast is like Joe Rogan, like, and you'll hear it in his speech, like he's like, "Wow, that's fascinating. Oh, tell me more about that." And like, there are some times where he'll be like, "Whoa, whoa, no, no, that's not the case," but very much more like just he'll get point of views and explore point of views, whereas like Jordan Peterson is definitely more assertive and will say like, "This is how it is." This is
Disagreeable. He might use the term disagreeable.
yeah, and he'll pause, like he'll be very intentional with like, whoa, stop that sentence, you got to explain what you mean by that before you say the next sentence,
Yep.
because otherwise we're going to get two different answers.
Yep.
And
Hmm.
so yeah, I mean, that's how I'd compare them. Like basically one guy is really just letting people kind of speak, Rogan's letting people speak freely and saying, that's interesting. I agree. I disagree.
Sure.
Here's like, this is my point of view. And Peterson will say, this is why you're wrong, or this is why you think like that. Like he'll really analyze.
Well, and here's the interesting thing. It's like don't get me wrong, Joe Rogan is obviously a brilliant guy on many levels, but Jordan Peterson, it's not like Jordan Peterson like studied like well, I mean, I don't want to get anyway, but what he studied specifically is psychology, right? So he analyzes every situation, not like randomly, you know what I mean?
No,
It's very
yeah,
specific, and it's rooted from like spending thousands of hours, right? Like to talk about the kind of falsely understood but generally true premise of the 10,000 hour rules. Well, Jordan Peterson's probably got 100,000 or more hours of high level psychology research, and just that kind of respect for rigorous data analysis that you just don't get when you're just like a cool guy who's like been on reality TV your whole life. You know what I mean?
yeah. And I mean, it's a complete like Rogan will smoke and drink and stuff, but like as far as I know, Jordan Peterson just drinks water and eats steak.
Cake. Yeah. Yeah,
And
exactly.
yeah, very interesting stuff too. Like when they get into the diet stuff, and I mean, it is something
Yeah,
that
that's
that
beyond me. That doesn't sound right. Honestly, it sounds like he's choosing which studies he's reading.
well, yeah, but it's interesting. Like I was saying, like they just have immense health problems in the family, like that have been solved with their dietary changes. Like I don't know if you've touched base on much of his daughter, Michaela.
I'm aware of her. I'm aware of her.
Yeah, so basically, like growing up, early onset arthritis,
Yeah.
and huge problems, all sorts of drugs and consultants and doctors, Canada, US,
Yeah.
blah 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 blah. And what basically solved it, if I understand correctly, was a dietary change. So if I understand it correctly, I think she just eats like fucking goat or something. Like it's one type of meat.
Okay.
That's all she eats.
Yeah. So if I mean
But
if
like no
it
vegetables, like the like it's
sure, sure. Yeah, I understand. I understand. It's the Uncle Rolly diet of the goat eats the vegetables.
yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, yeah. I
it's
mean,
not
if
like
you have a particular genetic or health, outcome, and you want to treat it with a particular diet, I think that's fine. I think what often ends up happening is diets in our culture, right, exist always as fads. It's like that, it's like if you look up right now, do I have
yeah,
astigmatism? You could look up a test and you might think you have astigmatism, and that's total bullshit. And so what people do with that kind of knowledge, this is my one critique, I won't talk about any of the politics, god forbid I talk about the politics, but it's like people look at those diets and they see how they're kind of like the extreme version of paleo, and they're also backed up by this really smart guy, and they're just going to forget the fact that it's hyper specific to, if it's in the family, that's a super genetic thing.
yeah, no, for sure, for sure.
So people shouldn't say, oh, so I should just go on the Michaela Peterson diet. You know what I mean?
Oh no, and I think they're pretty clear on that. Like it's not.
Okay. Well,
I,
so that shows my ignorance, and I'm happy to show my ignorance because
no,
that's
no, no.
how I
I don't
learned.
think they're advocating that everybody does
But
this.
people still interpret it that way, sometimes.
Oh, I'm sure, and it's
That's
like,
one of the dangers. But there's danger everywhere. There's danger everywhere.
oh, for sure, and like if we're in the interest of name dropping people that were interested, that I'm sure will come up. But if you're the Gary Vaynerchuk, Gary V,
Sure, absolutely. I
yeah,
fucking
so,
know everything about fucking Gary V. Fuck,
yeah,
fuck, 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 shit,
yeah,
shit, fuck.
exactly, exactly. Probably why he's so relatable. And I don't know if this is true or not, but I'm sure he does well in Canada because I honestly think we swear more than people admit. Like, like,
Oh yeah, bud.
yeah, exactly. Like, wouldn't you fucking know it? But yeah, so it's kind of funny. Like, yeah, I don't know. I can't remember his story if it's like Brooklyn or something or whatever. But yeah, I guess people swear there. But yeah, like I said, wouldn't you fucking know it in Canada? I'm sure we do too. But like it's just interesting to hear, like there's some people that I know, and like I went to school for business, so we have a wide range of like people that were all in school and now they're all out of it and trying their own side gigs, or launching their business, or working and running a business. And like there's somebody that was telling me like, oh, like Gary V, like yeah, he's all about like grind and hustle, and you can't even like have freedom. And like yeah, it's just like not a good mindset to have. And it's like you listen to the guy and he's like, I don't like, his number one thing is like, if you can find a way to be happy and you're making 40K a year, then don't try and chase 80K a year. Like
Yep,
he's very, very, very specific on like, you
yep.
need to do what makes you happy, and see if that works for you. Um,
Yeah, well, I think that, like, what do you think about the phrase going all in? Because if I extract, I agree with you. If I extract any kind of deeper message from Gary Vaynerchuk that's useful, and obviously it's useful because he has this reach, and I could talk about all kinds of critique. Jacobin, Anna Kasparian, who debated Ben Shapiro once, she's got a great deconstruction of Gary Vaynerchuk on the Jacobin show weekends. But if there's anything that's important about Gary Vaynerchuk, in light of what you just said, if you're happy at 40K a year, do what you're doing for 40K a year, but go all in.
yeah, yeah.
Don't fail at what you do for 40. Don't settle. Right. That's kind of what he's saying, which I think is profoundly important in the world.
Yeah.
So what's your opinion about that phrase? Because when I look at your business, when I look at the different moves you've made, when I look at like what you do in terms of trying to really get shit done and build your business and see it grow, it's like you don't give up. Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's the grit that so what's your opinion on that phrase? Or is there a better phrase from Gary Vaynerchuk than going all in?
Uh, well, yeah, there's definitely better phrases, but let's stick to that. Like, I think, um, well, I mean,
Well,
I think,
okay, so pause 1 second. So there's
okay,
going all in. I'd love to hear what Gary Vaynerchuk says. My understanding of what Jordan Peterson says, to stick with that as the main focus,
yeah,
is he quotes the book of Matthew. He quotes my favorite passage. I think he quotes it totally wrongly, but it's interesting to hear his critique
okay,
or his vision. He quotes Matthew chapter 6, verses roughly speaking 26 to 34. Verses 33 to 34 are seek out like it's that song we learned in elementary school. Regardez les oiseaux du ciel, ils ne
yeah,
sèment ni n'amassent. Cherchez d'abord le royaume, right? So seek out the kingdom of heaven,
yeah,
and seek the justice of God, and the rest will be given to you, right? So it's like, stop worrying about your trivial things. Stop worrying about your appearance and whatever. Aim at the highest possible good. This is what he talks about in his Pinocchio lectures. Aim at the highest possible good
yeah,
and let that be your goal, right? And then there's no telling how much good that can do for everybody else,
yeah,
right? So that's my version of going all in. It's like if you're really aiming at if you take the idea of the word aim seriously, right? And you take an arrow and you really want to fucking hit the center of the arrow, then you're going to invest your entire soul. Like there's this book Zen and the Art of Archery. Anyways, I could go on it, and which says spend 20 years training to realize that all you have to do is just kind of let it go. But of course it's about the 20 years of training,
yeah,
right? So that's what it means to go all in. This is my last thing I want to go. So my favorite version of that word is kenosis. And that's how when I made that post about your business for the faces thing, I said, I've watched you every day go through profound acts of kenosis, which is the Christian notion of giving of oneself, emptying the self. Kenosis is like when if I understand correctly, it's like the idea that like Christ on the cross is like giving his entire self, right? And so I think that's very similar to seeking out the highest good. All in. Gary Vaynerchuk, that's what he's preaching. When I talk to our brother Billy, that's what he's on about. So what do you think about that? What's your favorite version of that message? I like kenosis. I like Matthew 6:33.
yeah. I mean, I think the whole like all in is like what else, like
Sure.
like me and Lou, my wife, like we've looked at it many times, like in this whole jump to launching our own business, and it's like, we look at the money we could make and also being at home with the baby, and it's like, well, the alternative is do we go back to work and we're not with the baby, or we have to pay somebody to watch the baby, or all these things, and it's like, well, we look at it and it's like,
Yeah.
can we really afford to go back to work? And the answer is no. Like if we just go all in the business, then like everything kind of
Yeah.
solves itself.
Yeah.
But if like
Yeah.
if the business doesn't work, then it doesn't solve itself. So the only answer is to run the business and make it work. Like going back to work would have been a nightmare. We
Right.
would have not had enough money and had no time.
Yeah.
And going into the business was, like, um, you either make it work and it works, or you don't make it work and you're in the same spot, it's not working, so you have to make it work, like, so that's the whole all in. Like there's no
That's profound. So what? So would you say that's that's like specifically about an act of love for your son, or would you say it in a different way? That's what I hear. I see it's like you're doing the ultimate best you can just to make sure that your son has like the best possible experience, which includes parental contact, parental closeness, which you're absolutely right. In most cases, if you have just a typical job, you get like so little time. It's
Yeah,
dehumanizing. Your kid is the most important thing in the world, or is it something else?
for sure. No, like you're basically on the nose there. Like it's really like it's the ultimate game changer, and
Yeah,
it really puts into perspective. And I will name drop another author and podcast kind of
sure.
guy. It's Jefferson Bethke.
Okay,
So,
never heard of him.
yeah, well, I'm sure he'll come up later in a few of our future things. But basically, a Christian pastor in Hawaii,
Sure.
and um, well, he's published a few books, but he's very big on like the take back your family and the well, I think that's the name of I think I just read that book, yeah, Take Back Your Family, or it's somewhere along those lines, but
Yeah.
has very practical books like the one before that is To Hell with the Hustle, like
Okay.
do you really have to be working, or do you really have to like say yes to U4 soccer, like, well, why don't you just not do U4 soccer and spend time with your kid, rather than sending him with a coach and
Yeah.
10 other kids. Like, he'll have his friends, he'll have all these things, like just spend time with your
Yeah.
kid.
Yeah. Especially if he's like already in
Yeah,
school
does
or
he need
about
to
to go
be
to
in
school.
U4 soccer where I don't even think they count score anymore? Like,
Yeah.
you can do that with any people, like any of his friends he invites over. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, obviously there's, different positions for everybody, but like these are the kind of concepts he goes into. Um, but yeah, it's like it's really it,
That's fascinating.
yeah,
What made you because I've never heard of this guy, like what made you come to him? Was it like through the context of like looking at various perspectives on parenting advice, or not at
um
all?
well, it was like 100% through Lou. Like, she
Okay.
was a big fan of them. So like it's a family, like husband, wife, and they have several kids.
Yeah.
And they're pretty like present on like Instagram with posts and reels, and then they launch these books. They do seminars like all throughout the U.S.
Hmm.
Um, and actually, before we had Hudson, we were looking at going down to one, but it's one of those things. Like, if your wife's into it, then you kind of you hear a bit, and then you hear a lot, and then the rest is history. We read
Says every like the not.com like engagement description. The
yeah,
rest is
yeah,
history.
exactly. But like, so like I said, like the book before this latest one was To Hell with the Hustle, and we started reading together, but like I understood it,
The
and like
hell
I
with
knew
the
what
hustle. Wow.
I didn't finish it. But this latest book, Take Back Your Family, very, very touching. Like, it's very interesting, very like focused on your kids, and it's like it goes back to a time when most people were business owners. Like, your family was your business, and you
Yeah.
had a home, or if you were a cobbler, you repaired shoes, but your shop was
Okay.
attached to your
Oh,
house.
it goes back to that
Your
time. Okay,
Yeah, and
fascinating.
it makes and it like very interesting comparisons in the book. Like, it says
Yeah.
8-year old kid in Israel,
Yeah.
uh, like in Bible times,
Sure.
versus 8-year-old kid in America, and like very, very interesting things.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
and even like,
That's gonna be yeah, I'll get a copy of that book tomorrow. Let's do it. Let's do
yeah,
an
yeah,
episode.
for sure.
Absolutely.
But that's the essence of it. That's basically like, the kids come, and like they really become part of the team. And it's crazy, even when they're this young. Like, they're a blob, but they they form and shape so many of your decisions. So
Yeah, yeah,
Very,
yeah.
very, very impactful for sure.
That's wild. That's amazing. Because it's like, here's the thing. It's, let's say that's the motivation that dives you to go deep. But if we look back to the beginning of episode or part one of this pilot, what I was talking about was that with every project you make, you know, you're bringing some really beautiful meaning, right, to all your clients' lives.
Yeah.
And that to me is an exact expression of what Jordan Peterson is trying to get at with his, I would argue, deeply flawed, but we'll get into that in another episode, but with his interpretation of Matthew 6:33, which again, probably one of the most, the Sermon on the Mount, what an iconic moment in the Bible. I haven't listened to the Bible for Normal People episodes on it. I'm sure there is some mention of it. Anyways, I just wanted to say that that's just to tie that full circle to you starting to talk about, it's like you think about, I forget the name already, but the premier from Newfoundland. Why is he doing it? It's probably because he has grandchildren, you know what I mean? And he's
Yeah,
concerned.
it's Brian Peckford. Again, not a name I ever recognize because he's an old
Sure.
fucker.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I think I know I used to work. I can't really say this, but I think I used to work from somebody who I would assume, based on what he's saying, he was of the Conservative Party, or maybe there wasn't even parties
Yeah,
back
but
then.
he was a conservative premier of Newfoundland, which is
Yeah.
few and
Well,
far between these
so
days.
yeah, I don't know. I don't know if so. I had a boss at this place, which I'll just try to be as vague of it as possible, just because I don't know how much I'm allowed to disclose, honestly. But I used to work at this institution, okay, that was like a heritage, national heritage. That's where it got most of its operating funds. It did a lot of community services. That's how I got hired to work there.
Yeah.
But the director was a former conservative MP from Newfoundland as well. And she was a fascinating character. I mean, compared to everybody else who worked there, namely
Yeah.
that I guess she hired. Uh, it was the most diverse work. I worked at a call center with a whole bunch of diversity, but honestly, in terms of the in terms of, if you talk about a small team of people, but often organizations with small teams of people are very similar,
Yeah.
right? Like-minded people come together and they make a thing. Well, this is very different. So here was this former conservative MP, maybe even premier, maybe even at least leader of the party. I never really learned the history, and I won't go too much into it, but her team was also very diverse, and that was perfect. That was always a paradox I didn't get, but I think it's like when you talk about what you're talking about, you talk about Jordan Peterson, I think it comes down to having a family.
Yeah, but I mean that paradox I think is more headlines than anything. Like I think
Sure.
there's ample diversity amongst conservatives. There's very many cultures that believe
Oh, of course.
in
Oh, no, obvious. No,
capitalism
yeah,
for sure.
no, for sure. Oh, yeah, we don't need to get into that. Absolutely. No, I that's not what I was saying. I wasn't saying like, oh, it was surprising that here's this conservative MP who has this thing. What I was saying is it's interesting, the different places. Like, it's interesting. I don't know. For me, it was just interesting how we encounter these figures. So your encounter with a former Newfoundlander MP. Yeah, it's kind of a meta thing again, but your encounter with a Newfoundlander former MP was through the Jefferson Bethke podcast. Mine was kind of through this job I had. But it's just to say that people are politicians for a moment in time. You know what I mean? And then they, like this guy, he's maybe, who knows what his deep motivations are. They could just be from his family. They could be because he knows how the political system works and he knows he can say something, or maybe he's finally pissed off enough to do something, or maybe he's just going through a manic episode like I was when I wrote Jordan Peterson. You know what I mean? But it's like it's interesting that we have this idea that we have to live in this Trudeau reality. I think that just to say something that we might both agree on.
Okay, I have a question for you before we we should try.
We should go to the three questions.
Yeah,
the three podcasts for you. Yeah.
So before that,
last question.
I'll ask one question. So Peterson podcast,
and I'll be brief.
If you really look at him, I think we've gone a bit back and forth, but really he's just a psychologist, and very yes, he's become political, but
and not just a psychologist, he's a psychologist of personality in particular. And he really subscribes to the school of the big five personalities. And if you use that frame of analysis on him, he's specifically somebody who's high in intelligence, creativity, and openness to experience, which is one domain. And the other domain he's really high in is disagreeableness. So that's my frame, but go for it.
No. Okay, so I do want to keep this on the political spectrum, because that was the topic of this specific episode. So Peterson, obviously you've consumed a lot of his podcast and or content.
What more so his lectures, not much of his podcasts.
Okay, that's still applicable. He's very criticized for being super right wing, and people shouldn't consume his stuff. How much weight does that? Do you feel that weight? Do you think it has any?
Here's the thing. A lot of that comes specifically from the queer community, which I have some beholdens to. I have many friends now who are transgender, and it has been the case, that some of the things he said, I don't know what he talks about transgender folks these days, but it has been the case that some of the things, as far as I understand, he said about transgender people, just continues to exacerbate the constant cyclone of violence which trans people are always subject to anyways. So that would be one reason why there would be kind of these overt, for example, attempts to deny him, platforms at different universities. But do I agree ultimately with that? No, right?
So, but does he? Could you get specific with that? Because I can't.
Unfortunately, I can't. Because I've just stayed away from those particular things, but it's just so let's talk about what I do know. What I do know is that
can I wait 1 second? Can I interject quickly?
Please.
I've seen that criticism, but I've never seen anything to that.
Right. So I'd have to. It would require a much deeper study, and there's 70 million more interesting things to spend time on, so I would say we should save my actual critique for Jordan Peterson for another episode. And I'll just name it very quickly, which is I think he misunderstands the way the left talks about power, because he's interpreting it through the psychological study lens. But here's the thing that I could talk about, that I know that he talks about specifically, the reason, if we say not necessarily about the queer and transgender issues, which I have a suspicion are valid, there's generally in the ways in which he talks about the gender binary, because they're based in rigorous scientific studies. which happen to exist, I would argue, within a patriarchal society. They're deeply skewed, but they also tend to lean on the side where he often says phrases like, and the researchers were really pissed to find this because they really hoped that the values would be like in society, and that the results of various psychological studies would point towards equality among the sexes, but they tend to point towards differences. Well, here's the thing. There is a profound sickness within feminism today, which misunderstands the nature of equality that early feminists were fighting for. There's a insane amount of depoliticization of feminism, and there's a misinterpretation of the phrase "the personal is political." So there's these hyperinflationary, things. Again, I would have to go deep within that, but what I would just have to leave the thing saying is like, it's like, okay, let's think about how my colleagues on the left typically engage with Jordan Peterson's content. They typically engage it through wonderful folks like Big Joel, like Philosophy Tube, like ContraPoints. Okay, the last two, Abigail Thorne and Natalie Wynn, are two trans women who have amazing videos deconstructing Jordan Peterson's argument. Tom Nicholas also has a great one on his thoughts about George Orwell, which is kind of niche but really interesting. But here's the thing. We get him through those lenses. That's not sufficient. That's silly. You absolutely have to, if you are going to talk about him, or if you're going to propose to cancel him or not. I mean, obviously he doesn't care about the canceling, but if you're going to propose to like not let him speak at your school, or have all of these, I mean, have the protest, but let him speak at the school is my view, which is to say, you have to watch his psychology lectures. You have to take seriously what he's talking about. And absolutely can't. Again, it's like there's so many. I could name 60 more interesting people to listen to than Jordan Peterson. But if we're thinking about the value of numbers, which I think we forget are important, and numbers are super important, then yeah, people should look at his lectures on Pinocchio. People should look at his whole series on like his lecture series on personality, if only to just humanize him for 1 second and say, he's not just some monster who's he's not some disagreeable monster. Primarily, he's intelligent. He's high in openness to experience, creativity, and intelligence, right? And people see him just as a disagreeable monster. That's perhaps his own fault. I would say that's one critique of him. He is a disagreeable monster, and so because he's such a disagreeable monster, that hides the fact that he's also hyper intelligent and again, I would argue, worth listening to.
Yeah, good, interesting. That's more or less the viewpoint I was looking to hear. So that's good.
Absolutely, there's no way to deny that.
So the last thing before we get into that little closing segment is, I'll say, like, to wrap it right back to the specific episode, which is pertinent to like the dissecting podcast. Very interesting. So the first like 10 minutes of this episode, it's like the pre-recording, and then halfway through the podcast, they kind of agree. They're like, are you cool with just leaving that whole pre-recorded section? Like it's very informal. They're like, okay, are we recording? Yeah, okay. Do you want to talk about this? Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. So that's,
I did that in my guided meditation today.
Yeah. So it's a very interesting part where they're kind of like, again, they're fighting this big inflationary topic where half the country is, I mean, probably more than half is very like, well, what the fuck conspiracy, blah 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 blah. But he's like, let's keep it as real as possible. Like, let's not cut any of this, so people know, like, I'm just talking to you. Like,
Yep.
they introduce themselves, they get into it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Very very interesting point of view. And so he released, basically, like, it seems like he just released the whole video clip like right away.
Sure.
And like I said, like, you have that little bit at the end where he's like, he has one of his team members, like, I guess the producer or something. It's like, oh, can we keep going for a bit and touch into this topic? And he's like, yeah, I'm pretty fucking tired, like, fuck this. And it's I mean,
Huh.
it's not Gary Vee talk, Peterson talk, so he doesn't swear, but but
Fair
he's
enough.
basically, yeah, like, I can't do it, and like I said, like all in all, like, seems like he's a pretty frail guy, like he has some issues. So
Well, yeah, I would just argue his worldview is incomplete, and perhaps one day, if he reconciles his profound cognitive dissonance, then he might be able to, you know, uh, you know, not be so chronically uh, uh, under stress. But also, I would just say one thing. I understand that can seem very harsh and rude and
yeah, like, I would argue the
passionate.
opposite, but I'll
Yeah,
let you
but
continue.
so what I would finish with is like, but also here's the thing about kenosis, right? This going all in is, yeah, you're gonna end up tired as fuck, right?
Yeah,
And he does go all in, and I wouldn't want anything other than that. I want Jordan Peterson to be as loud as possible so that we can really understand what he's talking about, right?
yeah,
Just like the Convoy for Freedom, just like Maxime Bernier, bless his heart. It's very dangerous, but you know, when
what's
I
the
say when I say that, I mean this, like, just as I hope that you would say, same for Jagmeet Singh, same for Justin Trudeau. Let Justin Trudeau be a stupid fucking ape, on the prettiest ape there ever was. Let him be as loud as he needs to be, so that we can really hear what's actually going on. And I would just argue, for example, that's more possible, and Jordan Peterson would agree with this, that's more possible in these form of long form discussions
yeah,
where we can really acknowledge the humanity, which is what you're pointing towards, right? But so what I said was definitely rude, but I don't fucking care. So he's rude all the time. You know what I mean? And I would just say, like, there is a lot of cognitive dissonance. I would say he definitely should have more than Cornel West and the other two. He should just have either Pete Enns or Jared Bias or both of them, or be a guest on the Bible for Normal People.
yeah. It'd be
And
interesting, because, like, the problem with those is, like, you don't know who's saying yes and who's saying no. Like,
right,
so I'm sure, like,
right, right.
regardless of your email, like, I'm sure that's proposed. I'm sure either
Oh,
their
I'm sure
team,
everybody's already thought about it. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. And so
Yeah,
the question is,
I didn't think I was like particularly original in that. I was just, it's worth it to add my own voice. And I mean, it was also a manic episode, and I would never do it for real
hey, no,
without having established a platform.
no,
But
but Pete, that's the whole idea. It's like writing to your MP. Like, that's, like, you got to
sure,
do that shit.
sure.
Yeah,
No, it's similar. I mean, I've written to my MP. It's a little different, but you're absolutely right. It's
yeah,
about putting something in their face. I honestly do feel quite proud, and like, it's pretty gay of me to be proud of it, but of shoving bell hooks in the face of Jordan Peterson, I think that's pretty rad. But
yeah. Cool, cool.
yeah.
All right, let's close this up here.
Yeah, let's close this up. Last three things.
Yeah.
Uh,
So,
three
probably,
podcasts, and then the specific one that you want me to look at. The
yeah, yeah.
specific episode.
Okay.
Top three.
Top three right now. Yeah. So definitely Peterson. It's probably my one. Like, I listen to him a lot, and like him, I'll listen to a full podcast.
Yeah.
I'll listen to a lot of snippets out of everybody else.
Yeah.
Two, I would say Valuetainment. I mentioned to you
Okay.
before.
Yeah. Yeah. I have them down. I listened to one episode. It's very hard, but we'll talk about valuetainment.
Yeah, yeah, very, very capitalist person. So,
Yes.
so that would definitely, yeah, push you. Very interesting guy though. He does bring on all sorts of characters. Also, I one of these days I'll pick an episode for you from him because he'll go against interviews with some hardcore communists, like,
Oh,
but
interesting.
yeah,
Interesting.
very, very interesting. Like people that are very, very like very outspoken, pure communists, like well above socialism and stuff.
No, I know the type. I lived with one, and after reading the kindergarten curriculum, I'm leaning towards it myself. But we'll
Yeah,
leave
yeah,
that for
interesting.
another
So
discussion.
I
So the
maybe not
number
this
two,
week because I don't have
yeah,
one.
fair
I
enough,
don't have
off the
one.
hand. But okay, yeah, another time, another time.
Yeah, so he's good because
So
he'll go.
Peterson, valuetainment.
Yeah, and I'll throw a little like outfield one. It's called the Let's Quit podcast.
Okay, interesting.
A bit smaller players, but they're like a woodworking couple
Yep.
in I think they live in Texas now.
Okay.
A pretty interesting story. Like their day job is hurricane hunting for the military, like the U.S. military.
Okay.
But because of the nature of that job, it's lots of time off, and they're on call for
Yeah.
hurricanes,
Yeah.
I guess. Um,
Huh.
so meanwhile, they developed this podcast, YouTube channel, and woodworking business.
Hmm.
Pretty interesting. Like the whole Let's Quit podcast is based off of, like it's okay to quit.
Yeah.
And I mean, it goes into all sorts of topics like quit your job, but like quit also like, quit trying so hard or like,
I get
quit
you. Yeah.
overthinking. So they just
Yeah.
basically they pick
Episode
every
at different things to
topic and
quit.
they say
That's really
quit doing
creative.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah, so pretty interesting for like.
Do they have an episode called Quit Social Media, or are they not about that?
I don't
Because
know.
Cal Newport would be his big mantra more than anything ever is quit social media. But we can get
Yeah,
into that later.
yeah, I'm not sure, but
Because obviously when you have that, it's not about stopping social media, it's about stopping all of the bad engagement with social media that is
yeah,
unproductive. Yeah.
but I would argue like there's actually like it is pretty interesting the group of people like that don't partake in any social media, and they're
Right.
like what's really cool is some celebrities.
Yeah.
I don't like I won't get into any actors' names, so I'm very under a rock with that. But
Me
I
too.
don't know if you're familiar with the show Peaky Blinders.
No.
It's like an English gangster show.
Okay.
So much more popular in the UK. But the
Sure.
main character is again very famous because of the show, but no social media. And like there's a few interview clips, and they're like, "Why don't you have this?" He's like, "Why would I need it?" Like, and
Yeah.
it's just it's an interesting debate. Like,
Yeah.
do you really need it? And the answer is no.
Yeah.
But
Well, but the thing is, you have to, as like Cal Newport backs up his message of quit social media with the specific advice to be so good they can't ignore you, right? And so if you're somebody like Jordan Peterson, he took that to heart. Obviously not from Cal Newport because he's older than Cal Newport, but he took that fundamental human idea to heart and said, yeah, well, if you look at Jordan Peterson, he stopped. He used to be a problem drinker and all of these things, like all of us, and stopped at a moment when he realized, hey, what I'm studying here is serious shit, and if I really want to make an impact and publish and let's say help reach a goal like being a Harvard professor, which he did, and be able to quit Harvard to go to U of T and then quit U of T to just run his own podcast, you have to be so good that they can't ignore you, right? So
yeah,
absolutely. So that's interesting. Quit. So it's
let's
called
quit.
Let's
Podcast.
Quit. Let's Quit. That's the
Yeah,
and
it's definitely
what's the episode you want me to listen to of which podcast?
okay. I'll give you Yeah, I'll give you the communist one from Valuetainment. So I'll send
Oh,
you
you
a link
found it.
after.
You found it. Okay.
There's a few. He's done quite a bit actually.
Oh, fascinating.
Um,
Yeah, I would love to hear that. I love
yeah.
debates. Have
Okay,
you?
I'll give you.
Yeah.
Which one?
Let's see if I already have it. That would be funny.
It's actually this one is perfect. Slavoj is Slavoj. What's
Yeah.
it?
Yes. If it was Slavoj Žižek,
Yeah, do that one.
there's literally
So,
one with Slavoj Žižek.
oh, for sure, hour and 22 minutes long.
Slavoj Žižek on Value Team. You're kidding me.
Yeah. Um,
Oh, I would love that.
yeah, I'll share it to you right now. So very interesting guy. So quick backstory. Yeah, like Valuetainment, Iranian guy immigrated to the U.S. with his family, joined the poor immigrant family. Worked in gyms and stuff. Joined the military, finished the military, and then
Yeah. So you're saying episode 496, communist philosopher trashes capitalism?
communist philosopher debates capitalism. I just sent it to you.
Debate. So, because Jordan Peterson, that's the guy I'm talking about. Jordan Peterson has a debate with that guy.
No, but the one I just sent you is
Valuetainment.
David. Yeah,
I understand, but I'm saying I listen to this. You check out the Jordan Peterson debate. It's pretty interesting. Jordan Peterson starts off with a deconstruction of the Communist Manifesto. It's pretty good.
Yeah.
It's very misguided, but it's pretty good. It's pretty good.
Yeah, I think you'll enjoy this because the Patrick David, like he's not like he's not like Jordan Peterson. He's not gonna hyper analyze stuff, but he's
Oh no,
still
I've listened to a few episodes. I know his style.
yeah.
I know the
still
type
very
of person. I used to work for that type of person.
Yeah. Cool.
Right.
Okay. So I think that's first good run. We got part 1, part 2. We'll see how it goes, and
Absolutely.
yeah,
And I'll
come
do
up with a
that thing
name
I
sooner or
told
later.
you about the editing and the screenshots. But yeah, I really have to pee, so let's call it there. I'll cut
Okay.
that out.
Sounds good. Good night.
All right, rock out, man. Okay, yeah. So I'll stop the